Another round of March Madness games was wrapped up this weekend as the men's tournament heads into the Final Four and the women's tournament concludes the Elite Eight tonight. But with the men seeing the last number one seed get eliminated in the Sweet 16, how has this impacted this year's betting? Oppenheimer senior analyst Jed Kelly joins us now. Jed, do we even have anybody better than a top five team seeded that's made it into the Final Four here? And has there been any impact?
Well, typically you generally get two number one seeds that make it. Now you can argue UConn back in December was probably the best team in the country. It was one of the best teams in the country. Then Big East started and they started to lose a couple games. But has this impacts betting? It's been a pretty profitable year for the sports books, especially this year relative to last year. I think if you recall, the sports books had tough holds in March of 22. This year's been much better. There's a couple of things at play. One, last year you had St. Peter's. A lot of the public got on that story in the Sweet 16. And then number two, you had a lot of heavy favorites, blue bloods, make the Final Four: North Carolina, Villanova, Kansas, and Duke. This year, obviously, I think it's the first time ever no number one seeds made the Elite Eight, and it's the first time since 1970 that we have three teams that have never made a Final Four before.
And when you get that kind of activity, does it tend to increase or decrease the betting interest, right? If people if their brackets get blown up early, do they just sort of give up and not place further bets?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think the first and second round, the first round had record ratings, right? So I think you had a lot of interest. We also have more states. It's also an extremely engaging event to bet on. So I don't think it impacts the handle as much. Certainly if people are losing more, they tend to bet less, but the games have really been exciting. Kansas State, Michigan State was great. You had UCLA, Gonzaga. Last night you had Miami and Texas, where Miami came back and won. So we've had a lot of exciting games despite none of the big name programs being left.
And so, this is, of course, leading up to the NBA Finals. This is kind of the March Madness is the precursor for some of the commencement of what else is yet to take place in basketball. So this could be even just kind of a trend setting or a wave setting, even, if you will, going into what the betting could look like for the next 2-3 months, even for some of the books out there. What are we anticipating for that to really net out at as we move into this next quarter, and even for some of the companies that you're covering?
See, that's been like the difficulty is typically what you've seen is sports betting's really popular into the Super Bowl. You have a little bit of lull, then you have it popular into March Madness. What the sports books haven't been able to do as much is really increase the betting post the Masters, right? Like you do have interest around the NBA, MLB starts, but you do see a lull, call it from end of April to Labor Day. Now there's a lot more going on. People are out more. So that's one of the things that we haven't really seen the sports books do is sort of drive that engagement into spring, into football season. So, we do have more states that are legal. So now you can actually see the sports book do more brand advertising around sports betting. You're seeing FanDuel and DraftKings do a lot of that. And then, can they do some sort of interesting, developments around product, around maybe like same game parlay that can bring people in and keep them engaged until football season.
When you look at DraftKings specifically versus some of its competitors here, how's it doing? Does it have a leg up as sort of an online betting native company? Some of its competitors have bought other sort of native companies, but I just wonder how it ranks.
Right now, DraftKings is number 2 in online sports betting. Flutter's FanDuel is clearly number 1. They're probably generating a 12% hold on their total handle. DraftKings is probably around like 8.5-9%. So FanDuel has a big edge there, and they're allowing them in the higher yield is allowing them to just do smarter targeted promotions. So you're seeing Flutter's FanDuel clearly take a number 1 lead in sports betting. However, DraftKings is doing better than them on iGaming, and we still think DraftKings has better customer acquisition competencies. But FanDuel's clearly number one, DraftKings is number two, and then it's BetMGM number three. But what you're seeing the land-based players pull back and leverage some of their omni-channel capabilities in regions that they're strong. You see BetMGM is really strong in Michigan, but they're not as strong in New York because they just don't have that land-based presence.
Jed, while we have you, some of the most recent news out this morning is that the NFL is going to be looking to put forward a vote, and that's going to be centered around how they have in-stadium sports books open, and perhaps even on game days, keeping them open as well. I mean, is there a net effect that you believe in terms of a windfall that some of the companies you cover are going to be able to see from this?
It'll be slightly, it won't be that big of an impact. I think it'll help with branding. The one thing to remember is you can still bet on your phone in the stadium, right? So, why would you go to a ticket counter if you can just open up your mobile device? The other thing too is that when you're in the stadium, it's actually real-time action, so you can bet live. So I don't think it has a huge impact. I think it's just better for the brands. You can just do more branding, and maybe you might be able to acquire some more customers on some at the sportsbook promotions, but we don't think it's a huge deal.
Jed, good to catch up with you. Oppenheimer Senior Analyst Jed Kelly talked to us about sports betting. Thank you.